For more than 4 decades, Anjelica Huston has played Hollywood's most composed women, cool, intelligent, untouchable. But behind that controlled exterior lies a story she avoided telling for years, especially when it came to one of the most powerful figures in American media. In recent reflections, Huston quietly confirmed what many in Hollywood only whispered: her relationship with Oprah Winfrey changed forever after one defining moment of professional defeat. It wasn't a loud feud, no public insults, no tabloid war. Instead, it was something far colder and far more damaging. Huston suggests that after her Oscar win, she felt herself erased, frozen out, and treated as though she had crossed an invisible line no woman was supposed to cross. To understand why this silence mattered so deeply, you first have to understand the lifetime of loss and endurance that shaped Anjelica Huston long before Oprah ever entered the picture, and that story begins much earlier than anyone expects. From the moment Anjelica Huston entered the world, she learned a brutal truth early. Love in her family was conditional, distant, and unreliable. Her father, the legendary John Huston, was not present at her birth. He was in Africa, chasing cinematic ambition, and that absence set the emotional blueprint for her life. John Huston loved fiercely but selectively and always on his own terms. Infidelity was routine, and emotional availability was scarce. Her mother, Enrica Soma, absorbed the damage quietly, while Anjelica watched, learning that women endured rather than demanded. This upbringing didn't create fragility, it created vigilance. Anjelica learned to read rooms, anticipate moods, and suppress her own needs. The lesson was simple but dangerous. Survival required silence. That lesson followed her into every relationship she would later form with men, with Hollywood, and eventually with power. Long before she encountered fame, she had already mastered restraint. And in an industry that rewards composure but punishes vulnerability, that restraint would become both her armor and her curse. Anjelica Huston did not stumble into destructive relationships by accident. She was conditioned for them. When she met photographer Bob Richardson at just 18, she mistook obsession for protection. He was older, volatile, brilliant, and broken, eerily familiar. Richardson's love came with surveillance, jealousy, and violence disguised as passion. He destroyed her belongings, isolated her emotionally, and punished independence. Yet, Anjelica stayed. Not because she was weak, but because chaos felt recognizable. Hollywood often frames abusive relationships as personal failures, but Huston's story reveals something deeper: repetition. We seek what we know, even when it hurts. Leaving Richardson required more than courage, it required unlearning her childhood. When she finally walked away, she wasn't just ending a relationship. She was breaking a pattern. That rupture mattered, because the woman who would later endure betrayal from powerful men in Hollywood was no longer naive, she was observant. She had learned how domination operates quietly, without headlines. And that knowledge would resurface years later, in a far more public arena. When Jack Nicholson entered Anjelica Huston's life, Hollywood saw a glamorous power couple. What it didn't see was the imbalance. Nicholson was unapologetically unfaithful, emotionally evasive, and culturally protected. Anjelica, meanwhile, absorbed humiliation with composure. Affair after affair confirmed what she already knew. Talent and fame insulated men from accountability. Yet she stayed for years, believing patience might eventually be rewarded. It wasn't. Their relationship taught her another harsh lesson: that loyalty does not guarantee respect, especially when power is uneven. This realization reshaped her approach to Hollywood. She refused to leverage Nicholson's influence, choosing instead to build credibility slowly and painfully. The cost was isolation. The benefit was integrity. By the time she finally left Nicholson, Anjelica understood something critical. Endurance is not love, and silence is not strength. That understanding would define how she handled the most controversial chapter of her career, one involving a woman far more powerful than Nicholson ever was. Winning an Academy Award is supposed to be Hollywood's great equalizer, a moment when talent overrides politics and everyone is welcomed into the inner circle. For Anjelica Huston, it did the opposite. Her Oscar for Prizzy's honor quietly placed her against Oprah Winfrey, whose role in The Color Purple many assumed would be untouchable. There was no outrage, no headlines, no public tension, but the atmosphere changed overnight. Huston later implied that warmth evaporated, replaced by a calculated coolness that felt deliberate rather than accidental. Invitations became scarce. Familiar faces turned distant. In Hollywood, silence is never empty. It is a message. To Huston, that message was unmistakable. She had disrupted a story the industry wanted to tell. This was not about personal rivalry, but about hierarchy and symbolism. Someone else had been chosen as the moral center of the moment. Huston's victory exposed a harsh truth. Success does not shield you from power structures. It makes you visible to them. Anjelica Huston never publicly accused Oprah Winfrey of hostility, and that restraint was intentional. In elite circles, power rarely confronts it, simply withdraws. Huston recognized the pattern instantly because she had lived it before. Affection offered conditionally, approval revoked without explanation. What made this moment different was its scale. This was no longer personal or private. It was cultural. Oprah embodied moral authority, emotional credibility, and narrative dominance in American media. To fall out of that orbit was to risk quiet erasure. Huston's response was not defiance, but refusal. She turned inward, continued working, and declined to perform grievance for public consumption. That choice came at a cost. Visibility faded, opportunities narrowed, but autonomy remained intact. Where others chased re-entry into hostile spaces, Huston chose distance over appeasement. The industry took note. Systems built on compliance are unsettled by those who opt out gracefully. Over time, her image evolved from a figure defined by lineage and controversy into something far rarer, a woman immune to both praise and punishment. Because neither controlled her anymore. The death of Anjelica Huston's father did more than end a relationship, it sealed a lifelong struggle for approval that had shaped her emotional compass since childhood. Forgiveness arrived slowly, earned through reflection rather than sentimentality, and when it came, it was clear-eyed and final. Soon after, love returned, in an unexpected form through sculptor Robert Graham, whose presence offered stability instead of spectacle. His illness and sudden death devastated her, yet paradoxically released her from the roles she had spent decades performing for others. The absence of motherhood, forced upon her by illness, became a sorrow she guarded privately, no longer allowing the world to define her by what she lacked. Huston withdrew from explanation and performance. She began writing, choosing her work with intention, and living without apology. This chapter revealed not an icon, but a woman who finally understood that peace is not something you earn, it is something you protect. Anjelica Huston's life, stripped of mythology, is not a tale of grudges or celebrity feuds. It is a case study in power and how it disciplines those who refuse to conform. Power, she learned, does not always confront. More often, it withdraws, isolates, and waits. Her journey exposes a quiet truth. Dignity is expensive. It costs opportunities, comfort, and sometimes belonging. Yet its return on investment outlasts applause. Huston endured men shielded by fame, an industry intolerant of defiance, and cultural hierarchies that rewarded silence over integrity. What distinguishes her is not survival alone, but choice. When approval was withheld, she did not chase it. When doors closed, she did not beg them open. Instead, she claimed ownership of her inner life. Her legacy is not measured in awards or roles, but in self-possession, the refusal to shrink when silence is used as a weapon. That is resilience in its most disciplined form. The life of Anjelica Huston offers a rare and uncomfortable truth about success, power, and self-worth in America's most unforgiving industry. Her journey reminds us that achievement does not guarantee belonging, and recognition does not ensure protection. Instead, visibility often invites scrutiny, resistance, and quiet retaliation. Huston learned through family, love, and Hollywood itself that power rarely confronts directly. It withholds, it cools, it waits for compliance. What makes her story endure is not the pain she endured, but the choices she made afterward. Again and again, she refused to beg for acceptance, refused to reshape herself to fit narratives written by others. She accepted loss without turning it into spectacle, and disappointment without weaponizing it. In doing so, she reclaimed something far more valuable than approval: sovereignty over her own life. The lesson is both sobering and liberating. Dignity is costly. It may cost opportunities, applause, and proximity to power, but it grants something longer-lasting: peace, clarity, and self-respect. Anjelica Huston's legacy is not defined by who embraced her or who withdrew. It is defined by her refusal to be diminished by either. For anyone navigating systems that reward silence and punish independence, her life stands as quiet proof that resilience does not always shout. Sometimes, it simply stands firm and walks away. When the full arc of Anjelica Huston's life is examined without nostalgia or Hollywood gloss, what emerges is not a story about celebrity conflict, but a masterclass in psychological survival. From a childhood shaped by emotional absence, to relationships defined by imbalance, to an industry that rewards obedience more than truth, Huston spent decades navigating systems designed to test her limits. What makes her story resonate, especially for those who have lived long enough to recognize power for what it is that she never mistook visibility for safety, nor applause for belonging. Her experience after winning the Oscar crystallized a truth many never articulate. Success can be destabilizing, not because it elevates you, but because it exposes you. It reveals hierarchies, unspoken loyalties, and the quiet mechanisms of exclusion that operate behind smiles and polite silence. Huston understood that lesson instinctively because she had lived it long before Hollywood. She recognized withdrawal as a form of control. She recognized distance as a message. And rather than chasing reconciliation at the cost of her dignity, she chose restraint, self-possession, and distance of her own. This is where her story transcends celebrity. It speaks directly to anyone who has ever felt punished not for wrongdoing, but for independence. Anyone who has sensed a room grow colder without explanation. Anyone who has learned that integrity often comes with consequences. Huston's life teaches that dignity is not passive, it is an active, often lonely choice. It requires the courage to stop explaining yourself, the discipline to accept loss without spectacle, and the wisdom to know when silence is strength rather than surrender. In the end, Anjelica Huston did not win by being embraced. She won by remaining intact. Her legacy is not defined by awards, relationships, or proximity to power, but by her refusal to be shaped by it. That is a rare form of success, one that cannot be taken away, ignored, or quietly erased. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Where have you chosen peace over approval? Where have you stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of clarity? And if you value stories that go beyond headlines to reveal the deeper truths behind fame, power, and human resilience, subscribe, like, and share this video. These stories matter because they remind us that the most important victories are the ones no one else gets to take from us.